Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Imran Wahid, and today I will be discussing a very important topic for undergraduate students especially, and that is the vomiting reflex. As it is quite evident from the word reflex that like all other reflexes in the body, the vomiting reflex also has three essential components. Number one is that it has a center in the brain to which the information is conveyed by the peripheral and other receptors. These are receptors which are present in the stomach, in the intestine and esophagus, and they are conveyed to the center. This is the efferent limb of the reflex, which relays or conveys information to the center, and then center processes and analyzes the information and gives signals to the effectors which produce the act of vomiting. So just like other reflexes, it has receptors which receive information. They convey information to the center, and from center in the center the information is processed and is conveyed to the effectors which perform the act of vomiting. So it has an efferent limb, receptors and efferent limb conveying information to the center, then efferent limb. To simplify the diagram, receptors receive the information, convey to the center, center analyzes and processes the information and conveys it to the through the efferent limb to the effectors which perform the act of vomiting. Basically, act of vomiting is a complex reflex which is coordinated by a center in the region of brain called medulla oblongata. Usually vomiting starts with profuse salivation and sensation of nausea, and these two actions are initiated by the sympathetic activation or activation of autonomic nervous system. It is important to know that vomiting reflex is a complex involuntary neural process with receptors in the stomach and brain as well in the chemoreceptor trigger zone. They are taken by efferent nerves like vagus nerve, and the information is released to the brain, that is the sensory information, to the vomiting center in the medulla oblongata. Here in medulla oblongata, in the vomiting center, the information is analyzed and processed and is centrally integrated signals from all parts of the body which are involved in vomiting, and they are conveyed to this center vomiting center. And from here, after processing, the efferent nerves carry the information and commands to the effectors, which include the abdominal muscle, diaphragm, upper GI tract, which contract or relax to produce physical act of vomiting. Now we will proceed with actually what is the sequence of events. First of all, there is a stimulus. Stimulus includes psychogenic influences like it can be fear, it can be unpleasant smell, odor, and sights. These are various stimuli. Similarly, when we see that the stimuli are present in different forms, as I have mentioned, increased pressure in the brain, increased intracranial pressure can also be a stimulus for vomiting. Similarly, when we see from the eyes can see and transmit signal to the vomiting center. The labyrinth of the internal ear contains vestibular system. It also gives signals to the vomiting center for stimulation. For example, the stimulation of nerve fibers, nerve endings in the utricle of the internal ear vestibular system give rise to motion sickness and vomiting. Similarly, excessive distension and irritation of the stomach or small intestine, excessive distension or irritation of the gut including stomach and small intestine. All these signals, they also contribute to the vomiting reflex. Similarly, any disease in the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, especially in the appendix, gallbladder, uterus, or intense pain in any part of the body is also a stimulus for vomiting. Intense pain in any part of body. These are the stimuli which can initiate the signal for pain. Blood-borne effects are very important. Blood-borne effects. Those chemicals which are circulating in the blood, they have emetic or vomiting inducing nature, and they are also very important. For example, there are certain chemicals, there are certain drugs which are circulating in the blood. These circulating chemicals are detected by the receptors which are present in the chemoreceptor trigger zone in the brain, and they induce effects of the vomiting. Chemoreceptor trigger zone, which contains receptors which can sense and detect the chemicals which produce vomiting in the body. It is present in the brain. We will discuss it later on. So certain metabolic disturbances can also produce this, like uremia or renal failure in cases of some cases of diabetes, and patients with severe disease of the stomach. In pregnancy, increasing levels of progesterone, they can also stimulate the chemoreceptor trigger zone. So these are various stimuli. So there are obviously these stimuli are sensed by different receptors. What are the receptors? As I mentioned in this diagram, the first step is the sensing of the stimuli by these receptors. These receptors can be peripheral or central. Peripheral receptors, as I have mentioned previously, they are present in the gastrointestinal tract, including the stomach, the esophagus, the pharynx, the small intestine, and the large intestine. So these are basically present in the gastrointestinal tract. Peripheral receptors are very important because they contribute the main factor among many other factors of the causing the vomiting. So the second important thing is that the chemoreceptors, these are central receptors. They are present in the brain, and they are sensitive to toxins and chemical substances which can cause vomiting, which are emetic in nature. Emetic means which can cause vomiting. So there are certain other receptors which are present in the vestibular system of internal ear, and also in the upper part of the gastrointestinal tract. Central, as I said, central receptors are also important. So this is very important to discuss what is chemoreceptor trigger zone. Chemoreceptor trigger zone. This is the main zone which is responsible for initiation of vomiting by chemical substances or metabolites circulating in the blood. Chemoreceptor trigger zone. Chemoreceptor trigger zone contains central receptors, and these receptors are sensitive to the metabolites, toxins, and chemicals circulating in the body which can produce vomiting or which are emetic in nature. The chemoreceptor trigger zone is basically present in the brain stem, and it can detect the circulating chemicals and toxins in the body. It is basically located in the it is also known as area postrema, and it's basically located in the floor of the fourth ventricle of the brain. And chemoreceptor trigger zone is also known as area postrema. It is specifically located in the portion of the medulla oblongata in the floor of the fourth ventricle. So it is very important. It senses or detects the chemicals circulating in the blood. So though this is the, as I mentioned in the previous diagram, we have seen that the These are the receptors. Second one is the afferent limb or sensory limb. Afferent limb or sensory limb, which conveys the information to the center. So these were the central receptors which are present in the chemoreceptor trigger zone, and the peripheral receptors which we have discussed in the stomach, pharynx and esophagus and all parts of the body. So what is the afferent limb? How these impulses are carried to the vomiting center? Basically, the center is the vomiting center. This center I mentioned here, receptors, afferent limb and center. Center is the vomiting center. Vomiting center is present in the medulla oblongata. It is different from the chemoreceptor trigger zone. So we can see that the afferent limb or afferent nerves, they take the information to the vomiting center in the brain. This center in the brain, vomiting center in the medulla oblongata, they are the sensory pathways which carry the signals from the receptors to the vomiting center, CNS, cerebral cortex. The vagus nerve is the afferent pathway, which is the major pathway, and it relays the information from the receptors through the GI tract to the brainstem. Other afferent nerves include sympathetic nervous system. So now we come to the center. What is the vomiting center? The integration, the central integration or the central processing of the all the stimuli or the signals received from the receptors, peripheral and central, they are conveyed to the vomiting center, and it is processed in the vomiting center, which is located in the brainstem along with the nucleus of tractus solitarius and parabrachial nucleus. It receives all the afferent signals from peripheral and central and vestibular receptors. These afferent sensory stimuli are processed in the brainstem, and it coordinates the motor neurons required for the vomiting reflex. It is processed in the center, vomiting center, and then the information of the motor neurons is conveyed to the motor part of the reflex. Efferent limb is conveyed to effectors, and effectors then they perform the function. Now, what are the efferent nerves? The efferent nerves which carry the efferent limb of the reflex, which carry information to the effectors or the organs performing the act of vomiting, they are the major motor pathways which transmit the signals from the vomiting center to the effectors. Vagal motor nerve fibers of the vagus nerve and sympathetic nerve systems are involved in transmitting the signal, and the result in the coordinated motor response of the vomiting reflex itself. Effectors are very important. These are effectors. Effectors are involved in the act of vomiting. Effectors are involved in the effect of vomiting, and how they execute the act of vomiting is that the information conveyed by the receptor through the afferent nerves to the vomiting center is analyzed and processed, and also those information received from the chemoreceptor trigger zone, that is the peripheral and central receptors of the chemoreceptor trigger zone, analyze the information, is processed, and the signal is sent to the efferent limb or the motor part of the reflex to the effectors, and these effectors actually execute the act of vomiting. Effectors include different muscles. Diaphragmatic muscles of the abdominal wall, actually they contract forcefully in response to the motor nerve signals, and they contract vigorously to increase the abdominal pressure. Intra-abdominal pressure is increased, and thereby they squeeze the stomach. Consequently, the stomach relaxes, that is, the upper esophageal sphincter opens, upper part of the stomach cardia also expands, and a retrograde contraction occurs in the intestines. These features, they collectively produce a powerful response, resulting in expulsion of the gastric contents into the esophagus. The glottis closes and remains closed, while the larynx raises to prevent aspiration of the vomitus into the lungs. Other autonomic changes are also important, that is, they produce different chemicals and sympathetic activation. There is increased heart rate, deep inspiration, and followed by expulsion of the contents of the stomach out through the mouth. This act of vomiting is very important, and it is important to understand it thoroughly. So to be brief, let us analyze this photograph, and it's a very good diagram. You can see that as I have mentioned previously, that this is the stomach and small intestine, and it contains 5-hydroxytryptamine receptors. Similarly, you can see these are vagal efferents, that is carrying information to the chemoreceptor trigger zone. This is the chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is able to detect the changes, the circulating chemicals and toxins in the body, which can produce this vomiting. So this is the chemoreceptor trigger zone. This is the vomiting center, which is located in the floor of the fourth ventricle in medulla oblongata, near the nucleus of tractus solitarius. This is the cerebellum. It contains histamine 1 and muscarinic receptors, cholinergic receptors. As I mentioned, the receptors are present in stomach, sensory input from smell, pain, sight, and vestibular apparatus, which contains utricle and its nerve endings. All the information from these receptors is conveyed from the stomach, and the blood-borne mimetic agents like chemotherapy, drugs, opioids, and ipecac, etc., they are conveyed, detected by these chemoreceptor trigger zone receptors, and higher centers, fear, memory, pain is detected by the cerebral cortex, sensory input from sight, smell, and pain, and vestibular apparatus, utricle, nerve ending from the utricle. All these sensory stimuli are conveyed to the vomiting center. Vomiting center in the medulla oblongata analyzes, and it gives efferent pathways to the effectors, which include abdominal muscles, diaphragm, and they contract forcefully to execute the act of vomiting. So this diagram very nicely indicates how the vomiting reflex is executed. So to simplify, first of all, in this reflex, the receptors which are present in the stomach and small intestine, and the information received by the sensory input from sight, smell, and pain, and in anticipation of fear and memory or any fearful sight. Similarly, from the vestibular apparatus, and those chemicals which are being sensed by the chemoreceptor trigger zone, all these sensors or efferent limb of the reflex is analyzed in the vomiting center, and the orders or motor signals are issued to the effectors to produce contraction of the diaphragm, relaxation of the upper esophageal sphincter, and severe contraction and compression of the stomach, and reverse peristalsis in the intestine, and expulsion of gastric contents out through the mouth. I hope you understand this vomiting reflex, and I request you to see the video till the end, and also subscribe this channel, and watch the video till end, and click the bell icon so that you can get information about my other videos. Thank you very much.